that without Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you cannot understand the Quran. You need the explanation of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Number two, following the Quran demands you follow the Sunnah. And we're going to get to that in the next few slides. That's the instruction of the Quran to follow Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Number three is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises the preservation of the Quran, this entails preservation of the correct meaning of the Quran. The correct meaning comes from where? From Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The explanation of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Obedience, this aspect of the obedience that comes in the Quran many places. Just a few of them I've brought over here. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا آتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. Whatever the Messenger has given you, you take, and whatever he has forbidden you from, you refrain from. The other ayat, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ. That obey Allah and obey the Messenger. Number three, مَنْ يُطِعِ الرَّسُولَ فَقَدْ أَطَاعَ اللَّهَ. The one who obeys the Messenger has obeyed Allah. So explicit that the one who obeys Allah or obeys the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam has been equated to obedience to Allah. In the last verse that I have over here, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that tell the people, إِن كُنتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ. If you claim to love Allah, فَاتَّبِعُونِي. And then follow me. يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهُ وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ ذُنُوبَكُم. Allah will love you and forgive you of your sins. So what we understand is that from the Quran, the role and the responsibility and the function of Rasulullah is established. That it's not, the role of Rasulullah is not simply as a mailman who simply delivers the message. No, there's more to it, as was mentioned in the verses. There's more to it in terms of the other responsibilities, which is directly attached to the Quran, which is that just how we have to believe in the Quran. A person cannot understand Quran without Rasulullah. Number two, the Quran itself commands us to follow Rasulullah. Number three, Allah takes it upon himself that he will preserve the Quran. It also entails preservation of the Sunnah of Rasulullah. Why? Is because the Quran without the explanation of Rasulullah is incomplete. In terms of being able to correctly understand the message of Allah. So from these few slides, we understand the rank and the role of Rasulullah. We also believe in the Sunnah of Rasulullah. It's preserved unanimously. The Sunnah is also preserved. And we're going to get to that in just a minute. Now, the science of a Hadith. What is Hadith then? So Sunnah will refer to anything connected to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And you see that Hadith is sometimes used interchangeably with the Sunnah. But in a nutshell, both of them are related to the statements of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So anything that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says. Number two, any action of his. So he never said anything. An action of his has been narrated. The Sunnah of Rasulullah or the approval of the Messenger of Allah. What does this mean? That, like all the because once we understand that whatever they say, whatever they do, this is a proof. Right? This is something that has to be emulated. So what do we understand? If anything wrong is taking place in front of them, it's their duty to speak up. And if something happens in front of them and they do not disprove of that, this is part of the Sunnah. Right? Why? It's because the fact that Rasulullah did not disprove of something taking place in front of him shows that he had approved it. Why? Is because it's his duty as a Nabi to disprove of something that was incorrect. So this is why we see that the Sunnah and the Hadith both relate to the statements of Rasulullah. Number two, the actions of Rasulullah. And number three is the approvals of Rasulullah. Now, more so with regards to Hadith, Hadith is more so the vehicle through which the Sunnah is transmitted. Because Hadith literally would mean speech. Right? Speech. And it's more related to what we know as narrations. This is what Hadith has got to deal with. So the hadith is the vehicle through which the sunnah is transmitted. And what is the sunnah? It's talking about the wordings, the actions, and the approvals of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now the question comes, that hadith, as we may all know, it's all based on transmissions, which we know that this person narrated to this person, narrated to this person, narrated to this person. So it's very important that before we even go into the technicalities, we understand and we address a doubt that may come about to any person. Is that when you have a chain of narrators, or a chain of people that are narrating something, then what can automatically come to mind is that this is something that's not credible. Why? Is because maybe when we were in school, we did a telephone game where you had the entire class, one person says something into the ear of another, he says something to that same statement, he relays it to another, he relays it to another, he relays it to another. When it comes to the last person, the message most of the time is completely obliterated to what the original message was. So now this becomes a source of a doubt. That is hadith something which is credible, authentic? Is it reliable? Is it something that can be given merit to, worth to, value to? So this is when we understand what the science of a hadith is. And just how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised to preserve the Quran, it also entails preservation of the Sunnah. How has this preservation occurred? It's something which we pride ourselves in terms of our rich history and our rich legacy. So to the point where there are so many non-Muslims that have attested to this fact that this which the Muslims have in terms of their ability to authenticate and vet narrations is something that is unmatched in history. And we'll get to how it had begun. So the Messenger of Allah's life would have to be preserved in order to fulfill the command of obeying him. We have to obey him, along with correctly understanding the Quran. If Rasulullah's explanation wasn't preserved, how are we going to correctly understand the Quran? So this is where the field of Asma' al-Rijal and Jarh wa Ta'deel come into place. This is a sub-science or a sub-field of the science of Hadith. And there's so many different aspects of the field of Hadith. But we're going to look and analyze this specific aspect, which is the field of knowing people, knowing the biographies of people, knowing who they are, and being able to pinpoint every narrator to the point of knowing everything about his life. This is where we have this chain, and how it had come up was that when there was the malicious intent to come and distort the sayings of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what immediately came about after the demise of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was that you tell me who you have heard whatever you are saying, who are you narrating from? And if there's something that he is narrating from, who is he narrating from? To Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is exactly what we call the sanad or the chain. And this became to the point where it was anybody that wanted to say anything, the first thing that would be said was, Sumu lana rijal. Tell me who your people are, who you have narrated from. And it's going to be seen. Abdullah would say, Al-Isnadu min ad-din. Walaw al-Isnad laqala man sha' ma sha'. Isnad, which is the chain. This is part of deen. Because if you never had this chain, anybody could say anything. Anybody could say anything. So this is where we had this whole entire science of being very particular of mentioning who your teacher was and who his teacher was until Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it was to the point where this became an entire science within itself. An entire science that became codified with rules and principles. And obviously the science came after, due to which you can have differences amongst the scholars. But the point is the science became codified, developed as time progressed. And this is where we have narrations that were given a class of authentic. And if it met a certain criteria, then it was given the grade authentic of Sahih. If it didn't meet that specific criteria, it wouldn't be given that grade, it would be given a lower grade. So this is where you have terminologies. So you have, for example, you have the grade Sahih, which you know as authentic. But there are conditions in order for a specific narration to be graded as Sahih. For example, the narrators in the entire chain have to be, number one, all of them have got to be people that are known to be pious. The people that don't lie. And this is what is documented inside of the books. That who this person was. Was he thiqa? Right? Was he a person who was a adil? Was he a person who had morality within him in terms of being an upright person, a person who never missed salah, always in the masjid, who never committed any open sin, upright person. Number two, they would also look to make sure that not only was he pious, but his memory was good. He's got to have a good memory, his retentiveness. That was also looked at. Number three, the people that he is narrating from, did every person listen directly to the person who is narrating from? Number four, now this is with regards to the people in the chain. Number four was to dissect what he is narrating. That which he is narrating, is it something which goes against that which is known in deen? Meaning, is it something that is established in something completely new, that goes against majority of deen? Right? When you analyze this shows that there's something wrong. So in terms of what he is narrating, to analyze that. And number five is to make sure there's no right? There is another misconception, a little misconception. Weak hadith. We talked about weak hadith. Before we do the weak hadith, we mentioned a few things. If there was just a bit of
problem in retentiveness, we said it doesn't make it sahih, but it becomes hasan, becomes sound. Now, what about weak ahadith, da'if? So number one is there's a wide spectrum of types and causes of weakness. Why? Is because in order for a narration to be sahih, there's many conditions, right? So in order to make it weak, there are many ways that it can become automatically weak. So if there is a weak hadith, there is a wide spectrum. Some of them are slightly weak. Some of them are very weak, right? Therefore, this is why the scholars have analyzed these weak. And we are able, if somebody said it's weak, we can analyze why is it weak. Why is by looking and to see how was the conclusion deduced that why this narration was weak. So to understand this, there's a wide spectrum. The second point is it can be acted upon for certain purposes with set conditions. We'll come to that in a bit. The third is it can gain collective strength. And this is where I'm going to spend a few extra minutes. If you have, say for example, a person who's very pious, he's a narrator, but he had one issue in his life. What was his issue? His issue was that he would narrate from people that weren't so reliable. This is one issue of his. So he narrated something, but because he had this practice of narrating so reliable, what's going to happen is it's going to put a taint on all his narrations. But that which he was narrating, it'll be weak, right? Because of this practice of his that's been documented. We know it. But now, what if that which he is narrating has been narrated by many other people? What happens is it becomes classified as hasan li ghayrihi, which is it becomes sound, not because of itself, but because there are many people that are narrating the same thing with their own chains. So what happens? You gain collective strength. You have with hasan, you have sahih li ghayrihi, which is the criteria and the conditions of sahih are not met, but what happens is you have many narrations that are spread out and all of them combine, put it onto the level of sahih. Why? Is because there's so many of them and they give it collective strength. So what is the message that I'm trying to put across is just because a narration is weak does not mean it's fabricated and it has to be thrown in the trash. Why? It's because weak ahadith, da'if ahadith, even by itself can be accepted for certain things. For example, the scholars agree that if it's weak but not very weak, it can be used to establish things of virtues, for example. You can't establish a ruling of deen, but you can establish a virtue, for example. You can establish a story. You can establish an anecdote with a weak narration, as long as there's some conditions that are met. The narration shouldn't be very weak, where a person, for example, he used to fabricate narrations. Now this becomes very weak, right? Number two is it shouldn't establish a ruling or something important in deen. It should be something which the scholars have agreed that you can take weak narrations because it's not establishing something that is of so much importance where there's a lot of risks established, like establishing a ruling, for example. Right? And number three is you should be careful in attributing it to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So anyways, the point I'm trying to say is a da'if, a weak hadith is not the same as a fabricated narration. A fabricated narration, somebody who made up something about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's something you don't touch. And the scholars have gone into details of writing books to ascertain and to warn people that these are narrations that are being spread around, but they're fabricated. Right? So a weak narration and a fabricated narration, they're two completely different things. Now let's continue on, inshallah. So misconceptions, I'm going to go through this very quickly. Bukhari and Muslim are two famous compilations. This is what we know. That contain only Sahih hadith. The ahadith in Bukhari and Muslim are all Sahih. And the reason for that is because they are very, very meticulous and very, very stringent on their conditions. Like we know Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, he was very, very strict in terms of his conditions in order to enter a hadith into his book. Where one of his strict conditions was, he has to establish that two narrators must have met and they must have heard from one another in order to make it sahih. Not only the possibility, he has to have heard from him. It has to be established. Not only of them being able to have met, but you understand? So he had a very stringent condition. So Bukhari, rahimahullah, all the hadith he brought inside of his compilation are all sahih. Same thing with Imam Muslim. However, so the two books contain Sahih Hadith, but not all Sahih Hadith are in Bukhari and Muslim. So you can have a Sahih Hadith, but it's outside of Bukhari and Muslim. Why? In Bukhari and Muslim never claimed to encompass all the Sahih Hadith. What did they claim? That what is in these books are Sahih. Not that these are absolute and these are only the Sahih Hadith. This is a misconception. Number two, Ahadith were also written down in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, along with mass transmission and outstanding retentiveness. This is where I'm gonna blow your minds away with regards to our deen and how the people that were chosen to protect our deen were of such an amazing caliber. It's mentioned that there is one person, this is one narrator, about their memory that Allah Ta'ala had blessed them with and how they were chosen to carry out this amazing task. It's mentioned about Ja'far ibn Amr al-Damari radiyallahu anhu states that once he and Ubaidullah ibn Adi ibn al-Khiyar radiyallahu anhu decided to visit Wahshi radiyallahu anhu. Wahshi radiyallahu anhu was a companion. So Ubaid radiyallahu anhu that, do you recognize me? He said, what? Do you recognize me? He said, no. Wahshi radiyallahu anhu is a companion. He says, no, I don't recognize you. He says, however, he said, recall that once many years ago, there was a person by the name of Adi ibn al-Khiyar, and he had a child. Adi ibn al-Khiyar had a child. And he was told to take the child to the foster mother. And the child was completely covered except the feet. Except the feet. He said, Wahshi radiallahu anhu said, so I saw the feet of that child many years ago. And he said that your feet resemble those feet. And that is exactly what happened. That this young man that was standing in front of him, asking him, do you recognize me? Was that same infant child that he had saw, only the feet of that child, and he's able to recognize this person based upon the feet. He says, yes, you're right. I am that same person. I am the son of Adi. This was their memory. This was their retentiveness. And there's so many amazing, amazing stories about this. Once it's mentioned about Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. We know that how he has narrated many, many ahadith. Once he was put to the test. We're running out of time, but it's mentioned about him when he was put to the test in order to see how many, about his memory. The governor of the time made him narrate 100 ahadith, 100. 1 year later, he made a scribe sit in the back with those ahadith that he narrated the previous year and made him narrate the same exact 100 ahadith. He was able to narrate those same exact 100 ahadith without any mistakes. Same thing, amazing stories about Imam Bukhari rahimahullah and so on. So this was their amazing retentiveness. So just their memory was so amazing. What about books that were written from the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? We see that in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was already a compilation that was made, which was on the instruction or at least by the permission of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, written by Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As radiyallahu anhu. Right? That was called Sahifatul Sadiqah. As-Sahifatul Sadiqah. There's many others as well. There's Kitab al-Sadaqah that was written during the lifetime of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There was a khutbah given on the occasion of the conquest of Mecca, which was transcribed on the request of Abu Shah Yamani. Right? There was Kitab of Amr ibn Hazm. Rasulullah sallallahu dictated this book and then sent a manuscript with Amr ibn Hazm to the people of Yemen. This comes in the Imam Tahawi. So anyways, there are many, many small little compilations that were written in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the memory that was the tool was so amazing, was of such a high caliber. Imam Bukhari rahimahullah and Imam Muslim rahimahullah and majority of the famous compilers of hadith, though they came 200 years after, they weren't the first. They weren't the first. There's a long history of what happened in between, which has been documented and we know of. So anyways, now we're going to go quickly about the narrations regarding the 15th of Sha'baan. Now that we understand what the science is and how we are able to detect what the science is. In the ahadith with regards to the 15th of Sha'baan, we see, as a summary, there are many weak narrations that talk about the 15th of Sha'baan. Right? But we're going to analyze a few of them. And we're going to see that with regards to the background of what we have mentioned, what is the condition of these narrations and what does it establish? So the first hadith we see, Ibn Hibban rahimahullah. He has Sahih ibn Hibban, which is one of, just how you have Sahih Bukhari, he has his own compilation called Sahih ibn Hibban. He narrates, أخبرنا محمد بن المعافى العابد بصيداء وابن قتيبة وغيره قال وحدثنا هشام بن خالد الأزرق. Hisham narrates, right, to Muhammad. قال حدثنا أبو خليد عتبة ibn Hammad. This is the teacher of Hisham ibn Khalid. He says عن الأوزاعي وابن ثوبان عن أبيه عن مكحول عن مالك بن يخامر عن معاذ بن جبل رضي الله عنه. This is the companion. So every person is mentioned. We're able to detect every person in the chain. عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال يطلع الله إلى خلقه في ليلة النصف من شعبان فيغفر لجميع خلقه إلا لمشرك أو مشاحن. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, descends His special mercy towards His creation on the 15th night of Sha'baan, and He forgives all the creation except two people. One is a mushrik, right, the person who ascribes partners to Allah, and number two is a mushahin, a person who harbors malice and enmity to another. This is narrated by Ibn Hibban rahimahullah. What's the condition of this narration? Ibn Hibban rahimahullah, right, he mentions this narration, right, as well as Imam Tabrani in Mu'jam al-Kabir, as well as in Mu'jam al-Awsat. And the author of Kitab Mawarid al-Dham'an, he mentions that Tabrani mentions this narration in his Kabir and his Awsat, وَرِجَالُهُمَا ثِقَاتٍ. The people in these narrations are all people that are authentic. They're all reliable people. وقال العراقي في شرح المواهب حديث حسن. At the very least, what does Imam Iraqi, this scholar, what does he establish this narration as? As a Hasan narration, not even a weak. He doesn't say da'if, he says it's Hasan. So this is one of the strongest narrations for the 15th of Sha'ban. Some saying it's Sahih and some at least saying it's Hasan. So just below Sahih, in between Sahih and da'if. That's one narration. This is the same thing that has been translated. Then you have Ibn Majah, one of the 6 compilations of the hadith. So he says, حدثنا راشد بن سعيد بن راشد الرملي قال حدثنا الوليد عن ابن لهيعة عن الضحاك بن أيمن عن الضحاك بن عبد الرحمن بن عرزب عن أبي موسى الأشعري رضي الله عنه عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إن الله لا يطلع في ليلة النصف من شعبان فيغفر لجميع خلقه إلا لمشرك أو مشاحن. The same exact hadith narrated by Ibn Majah from a completely different chain. So maybe we talked about collective strength. The first narration, a separate amount of people. The narrator, the Sahabi, the companion was Mu'adh ibn Jabal. This is Abu Musa Ash'ari radiyallahu anhu, a different companion with different people. He narrates this. It comes in the Sunan of Ibn Majah. However, what's the commentary with regards to this narration? It's mentioned isnaduhu da'if, that this chain is weak. What's the weakness? لضعف عبد الله بن لهيعة وتدليس الوليد بن مسلم وقال الألباني حديث حسن. What's the weakness? It's what's highlighted. You have Al-Walid. This person is called Walid ibn Muslim. He's narrating from Abdullah ibn Lahi'a. These two people. So one is Abdullah ibn Lahi'a. Who was he? He was a person who was upright. He was also known to be a person who was upright, right? He was known to be equated to one of the faqihs of Misr. He was in Misr, from Egypt. They say that his narrations are like the narration of Imam Layth, which is one of the great scholars of our tradition. But what he would have a tendency of doing was, he would have a tendency of narrating from from strong, credible, and weak people. Walid ibn Muslim, what would be his? Sometimes he wouldn't mention who he's narrating from exactly. But what do we see with regards to the wording of the hadith? So this is a cause to make the narration and this chain, the wording of the hadith is completely fine because it was corroborated already from the previous. But with regards to the chain, it does show that there are some red flags, right? But always remember this point, that if a person narrates from credible and uncredible people, there's always a possibility that which he is narrating is from the people that are credible. So just because a person narrates from both, he's an upright person, he's a person who has retentiveness. But if he has this tendency, it doesn't mean that all his narrations are thrown away, right? So this is with regards to the condition of this. Then you have another in Bazaar, same exact narration. إذا كانت ليلة نصف من شعبان ينزل الله تبارك وتعالى إلى سماء الدنيا فيغفر لعباده إلا ما كان من مشرك أو مشاح لأخيه. Same narration in terms of the meaning. Allah forgives all the slaves except a mushrik and a mushahin. Mushrik, right, a person, an idolater, and a mushahin, who harbors enmity. What was the reason? Right, there's one narrator, but there's one person that mentions, Ibn Abi Hatim mentions it inside of his book, and he did not consider this narrator to be weak, and the rest of the people are all authentic. Right? You have another narration of the Musnad of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah. He's got the same chain, but what he has, so he's also got that same narrator, Abdullah ibn Lahi'a, that we talked about. He's got him in his chain as well. So it automatically makes it weak. However, what's the narration? He says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives everyone except two, a mushahin and qatili nafs, a murderer. This person is not forgiven. Right? And the commentary is mentioned. وقال شعيب الأرناؤوط, the muhaqqiq, the person who made the research behind it, he says, Sahihun bishawahidi, because there's so many other narrations that corroborate it. Like we mentioned, there's 12 in total. It gives it strength. All right? We have to go a bit faster. Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah mentions a narration. He's got a few people inside that make the narration have some red flags. What's the narration? Narrates from Aisha radiallahu anha, that once she says that I came, right, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was missing from the bed. He wasn't there. فَخَرَجْتُ فَإِذَا هُوَ بِالْبَقِيعِ, I went out, I went in search for him, I found him in Baqi', in the graveyard. فَقَالَ, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam came and asked, أَكُنْتِ تَخَافِينَ أَنْ يَحِيفَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكِ وَرَسُولُهُ, did you think that Allah and Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam would betray you? Some narrations mention with regards to this, that she went out, she saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she saw that he was in the graveyard, so she quickly rushed home. And when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came home, she had what's it called, deep breaths. So he found out that she went out. So he asked, what happened? He says, did you think that Allah and Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam were going to betray you? What did she reply? He says, قُلْتُ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ إِنِّي ظَنَنْتُ أَنَّكَ أَتَيْتَ بَعْضَ نِسَائِكَ, I thought you went to some of your other wives. Right? Woman, right? She said, I thought you went to some of your other wives. So then Rasulullah explained, and this was the night of the 15th of Sha'baan. إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ يَنزِلُ لَيْلَةَ النِّصْفِ مِنْ شَعْبَانِ إِلَى السَّمَاءِ الدُّنْيَا فَيَغْفِرُ لِأَكْثَرَ مِنْ عَدَدِ شَعْرِ غَنَمِ كَلْبٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, special mercy descends on this night, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives more people than the hair that is found on the sheep of the tribe of the people of Banu Kalb. In another narration, it's mentioned that why Banu Kalb? It's because لَمْ يَكُنْ فِي الْعَرَبِ قَوْمٌ أَكْثَرَ غَنَمًا مِنْهُمْ. There was no tribe that had more sheep than them. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives people on this night. Remember we said, weak narrations can establish stories, can establish virtues, as long as it's not very weak. There's some explanation with regards to the narrators. The next is another narration. It says something else, the same meaning. Abdullah ibn Lahiya is inside of here. Okay. We're going to continue on. The support. This is narrated by more than 10 Sahaba and Tabi'un. Tabi'un, the students of the Sahaba. Though the narrations are not on the highest level of authenticity, they enjoy collective strength. Imam Ata ibn Yasar rahimahullah, the great Tabi'i of Medina, said, after Laylatul Qadr, there is no other night in the year that is more virtuous than the night of 15th of Sha'baan. Imam Shafi rahimahullah said that du'as are accepted on this night. Imam Awza'i rahimahullah was of the view that people should engage in an individual worship on this night. Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, a companion, says that there are 5 nights when du'as are not rejected. One of them is the night of the 15th of Sha'baan. Imam Shafi rahimahullah, like we just mentioned, said du'as are accepted on this night. Imam Nawawi rahimahullah mentions the same thing. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, this name is worthy of note because of him being a person who was very, very, in terms of his authenticating a hadith and classifying others as weak. He was very, very strict, and many a times it was known that he made some mistakes in this regard. In terms of he made some weak that were not weak. He himself mentions about with regards to the 15th night of Sha'baan, he also says that ليلة نصف شعبان روي فيها من الأخبار والآثار ما يقتضي أنها مفضلة ومن السلف من خصها بالصلاة فيها وصوم شعبان جاءت فيه أخبار صحيحة. And then he goes on to explain with regards to the 15th night of Sha'baan that it's something that has some standing on it. So Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah also acknowledged the virtue of the 15th night of Sha'baan. Ibn Jaym Hanafi rahimahullah also, there are some other people that we do not have any time to go into. When you compile and look at all of the narrations, what do we see? We see that there are many categories of those people that are deprived on this night. And there's a list of 8. So one narration mentions لا ينظر الله فيها إلى مشرك ولا إلى مشاح ولا إلى قاطع رحم ولا إلى مسبل ولا إلى عاق لوالديه ولا إلى مدمن خمر. With regards to people that are not forgiven on this night. So number 1 is a mushrik, an idolater. Alhamdulillah, we're not doing that. We do have to make sure is that we have sincerity of intention. Watch our intention and make sure that we are not ascribing partners in Allah with regards to our intention. Number 2, mushahin, harboring enmity to others, for others. Something which is very, very widespread. If we know, something, just a side note, when Allah... give me the other mic, please. With regards to when the hadith that comes in the Sahih of Imam Muslim rahimahullah, that on Mondays and Thursdays, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives everyone except 2 people are mentioned, a mushrik and a person who's got grudges for another. So even at that time, he's not forgiven. Same way on this night also. This is the time that if we have any enmity for anyone, now is the time to make it up. Whatever the cause may be, there's some relatives. We make a phone call, we say that, how are you? How is everything? Keep us in your du'as. Take a gift, make amends. If there is a night before which we should use as an opportunity to make amends, let it be the 15th night of Sha'baan, where there are narrations that so many people are forgiven except a person who harbors enmity. So before the 15th night of Sha'baan, let us make sure that any grudges that we have, right, there's miscommunication or no communication going on with family members, allow this to be an opportunity to make amends. Right? There's so much, it's such a deep topic. Then we have those who sever family ties. Part of the enmity one, Rasulullah ﷺ has mentioned that a person who severs family ties will not enter into Jannah. لا يدخل الجنة قاطع رحم. It's very important to make sure that we're not severing any family ties. Even if somebody does something wrong to us, a family member is being rude to us, he's being very disgusting towards us, our duty is to maintain family ties and to ensure that we are fulfilling their rights. All right? Then there is trousers below the ankles. The narrations mention that if a person has the trousers below the ankles, whatever is below will be in the fire of Jahannam. Rasulullah ﷺ once told a person to repeat his salah. Why? Because he had his trousers below his ankles. So the scholars do explain that what is the ruling of keeping the trousers below the ankles. So there's other narrations that mention that out of pride. So if it is out of pride that a person has his trousers below his ankles, this is completely haram. This is the one that is a person who will be completely deprived from the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? With regards to a person who doesn't do out of pride, so there the scholars had a difference. Is it disliked to the point where it's close to haram, makruh tahrimi, or is it disliked, makruh tanzih, that it's not ideal? This was the differences amongst the fuqaha. But with regards to the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what he had established was he told explicitly to the companions that keep your trousers up to here if you can, which is between the ankles and the knee. If you cannot, then ensure that it is above the ankles. So this is definitely the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba radiallahu anhu. So especially if there's pride, then it's completely haram. Otherwise, the ideal is to emulate the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then disobeying parents, something which is very, very, very rampant today. But there's no regard for parents. Last year when I gave the talk and I explained about this aspect. There was a person that came to me and said, SubhanAllah, you gave a new perspective to me. My parents, now that they've become elderly, it's becoming very hard to deal with them. The point that I mentioned last year, and I'll repeat this year, was how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, when He mentions the famous ayah, that وَقُلْ رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا, make dua for them. What does Allah ta'ala say after that? رَبُّكُمْ أَعْلَمُ بِمَا فِي نُفُوسِكُمْ إِن تَكُونُوا صَالِحِينَ فَإِنَّهُ كَانَ لِلْأَوَّابِينَ غَفُورًا. Allah ta'ala knows what's in your hearts. Allah ta'ala knows what's in your hearts. If you are going to be upright and pious and righteous, Allah ta'ala is oft forgiving for those that turn in repentance. Why? Mufassir mentioned that dealing with elderly, aged parents is very difficult to the point that they become like children. And what happens is it becomes sometimes very hard to deal with them. And sometimes you will slip. Sometimes you will say something. But this is where you make tawbah, seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Understand that this is your test, this is your door. And when this door closes, it's never going to open again. This is your opportunity. Our ustad, our teacher would tell us, if you're driving and your father tells you take this turn and you know it's wrong, but just to keep his heart intact, take the turn. It's going to be a 20, 30 minute detour, do it. Don't break his heart. Don't show an arrogance or an attitude to your parents. Right? This is something that we take a lesson for today. From the narrations, a person who disobeys his parents on this night where everyone is forgiven. The mercy of Allah Ta'ala is descending. But there are those people that are deprived, those that disobey their parents. Number 6, consumers of alcohol. We may not have this problem, but there is a sector or a section in the Muslim community that are so far that are drinking and consuming alcohol. To do our part in advising them, as well as creating a distance so that they do not influence us and our families. That's one part. Those who commit adultery. And this is where I wanted to mention just one story that maybe we can take note of. Adultery, something which is so heinous. We know the punishment for it in this world. But in terms of the akhirah, how Rasulullah saw the people that were naked inside of the oven. The punishment. Right? In terms of the detriment to society that adultery has. What a grave danger that it poses. We see that this is why anything that leads to adultery has been stopped. Allah Ta'ala says, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. Don't even go near zina. Why? It's because it's a slippery slope. You step on one part, it's going to quickly go down. So even the gaze. So we see that many a times what happens is it's becoming very, very common and normalized is mixed gatherings where men and women are mixing freely. Something which is completely shunned inside of our Sharia. We see that there's a true story. I'm going to read out the story. Perhaps it can inspire anyone to understand the degree of this sin. It's a story narrated by the mother Ahmad, Ahmad. She narrates it. She says that my husband had a group of married friends, and because of our close friendship with them, we used to get together with them once a week in one of our houses to enjoy an evening of chat. Deep down in my heart, I was never really comfortable with the atmosphere in which we would have dinner, sweets, snacks, and drinks of juice, accompanied by waves of laughter because of the jokes and chit-chats that often went beyond the bounds of good manners. In the name of friendship, the barriers were lifted, and every now and then, one would hear suppressed laughter between a woman and the husband of another woman. The jokes were too much, dealing with no sense of shyness, with sensitive topics being discussed. This was usual and was even accepted and regarded as desirable. Although I indulged in these things along with them, my conscience made me feel guilty. Then the day came when it became quite clear just how ugly and filthy this atmosphere was. The telephone rang, and I heard the voice of one of the friends in this group. I said hello to him and apologized that my husband was not home. He replied that he knew that and that he was calling to speak to me. After he suggested starting a relationship with me, I got very angry and spoke harshly to him and cursed him. All he could do was laugh and say, "Don't try and show these good manners to me. Go and check on your husband's good manners and see what he is doing." I was devastated by what he said, but I pulled myself together and said to myself, this person is trying to cause the breakup of your marriage. But he succeeded in planting the seeds of doubt concerning my husband. Shortly after that, the major disaster struck. I discovered that my husband was cheating on me with another woman. It was a matter of life or death as far as I was concerned. I found my husband out and I confronted him saying, "You are not the only one who can have a relationship. I have received a similar proposition." And I told him all about his friend. He was stunned and absolutely shocked. I said, "If you want me to respond in kind to your relationship with that woman, then this is for that, tit for tat. This was a huge slap in the face for him. He knew that I did not intend to do that in reality, but he realized the great disaster that had befallen our lives and the immoral atmosphere in which we were living. I suffered a great deal until my husband finally left that loose woman with whom he was having a relationship, as he admitted to me. Yes, he left her and came back to his family and children, but how can I ever feel the same towards him as I used to? Who will restore respect for him in my heart? This huge wound in my heart is still beating out of regret and rage at that filthy atmosphere. It still bears testimony to the fact that what they call innocent get-togethers are in reality anything but innocent. My heart still begs for the mercy from the Lord of glory. So this is the reality of what happens when we don't take the precautions that have been clearly outlined by Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If we have been told to control our gaze, in what sense would it be permissible for us to joke and sit on the same table with somebody that's not our relative, somebody that we cannot marry, somebody who's not our mahram, something for us to introspect? And somebody can say that we've been doing it for so many years, nothing has happened. So do we say that if a person never used his seatbelt for so many years, I'm not going to wear my seatbelt? Or are we waiting for the day that we get into a car accident with a life-threatening injury and then we say, oh yeah, we should have worn our seatbelt? No. What we take for the directives of deen is like how a father is advising the child. It's all for our benefit. Rasulullah said that I am to you like a father is to a child. So understand that many a times these free mixing, this is the first step inside of leading a person to adultery, destroying a person's entire life. There was a brother that met me and said that he had a problem. Now he hasn't been able to see his children for 6 months. He's got a court case. I said, what happened? He said, there was some problems in the marriage. To get back at her, I got into an affair. Now there's a court case sitting on my head. Imagine that family had such a healthy family, completely devastated. Right? Why? It's because of this heinous act. What's the cause for it? وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. Don't go near it. Don't put your foot on the first step. Right? Understand that these are the matters that have been set for us as a safety precaution. So this is with regards to those who commit adultery, something for us. When we live in our society, even though the society may be doing something, our deen, it's in our best interest to follow deen, pure and pristine. Right? This is going to be the protection for our dunya, for our world, as well as our afterlife. Fasting on the 15th of Sha'baan, this is something which is inauthentic. So we're going to say, there's one narration that comes in the Sunan of Ibn Majah. There's a person by the name of Ibn Abi Sabrah. With regards to him, it's mentioned that he would fabricate a hadith. He was a person that people would say that he fabricates a hadith. So this is something that cannot be reliable. You can't establish the virtue of fasting on the day of the 15th of Sha'baan from this narration. Why? Because it doesn't even meet the criteria that we have mentioned. There's virtue for the night of the 15th of Sha'baan, but to single out the day of the 15th of Sha'baan for a fast, this is something that is very difficult to do. However, you can fast because generally in the month of Sha'baan, it's encouraged to fast in the month of Sha'baan like we mentioned. Number two is it's sunnah to fast every 13, 14, 15. So you can fast with that intention, the 15th of Sha'baan. It's the middle of the month. Or you can use it to make up any missed fast before the month of Ramadan, to make sure that any missed fast that we had, especially for our women folk, to make sure that they have caught up all the fast that they have outstanding. And there is a narration that speaks about the prohibition of fasting the last half of the month of Sha'baan. So this is a narration that is authentic, but the scholars explain that this is for a person who will need the energy and the rest for the month of Ramadan. So it shouldn't be that a person, so to say, fasts 2 consecutive months. You should give a person, you should be able to have some rest where it becomes disliked for a person to fast the second half of the month of Sha'baan. Fasting on the 15th and specific prayers, there are many narrations. These are the fabrications. This is those things that don't have any basis. Specific types of prayers, specific acts to do, specific things to do. These are things that don't have any sort of grounding and footing inside of our legacy. So these things should be abstained from. Ibadat, what one should do is on the night of the 15th of Sha'baan, a person should push himself. You would see that from our teachers and other great ulama, they would begin right after Maghrib. Why? It's because from Maghrib, the night starts. And it's from now that, from after Maghrib Salah, that the virtues start descending. So a person he's full of energy, rather than later on. He's full of energy, so therefore he should utilize from the beginning, from after Maghrib Salah. Ensure that we perform all our Salah with Jama'ah. At minimum, why Rasulullah has mentioned the person who performs Isha Salah and Fajr Salah in Jama'ah gets the reward of worshipping Allah Ta'ala for the entire night. So on such a blessed night, a person should make sure that Fajr and Isha and Fajr Salah he performs with Jama'ah. Similarly, one may engage in dhikr, recitation of Quran, Salah, learning and teaching, and any other form of worship. However, one must refrain from worldly talk and wasting time. If ibadah is not possible, then at least avoid all sinful and useless acts and go to bed as soon as possible. Right? And this should propel us to do so every night as a preparation for the month of Ramadan. So, what does it mean? That there's nothing specific that a person should do. But a person should do whatever he can. At minimum, abstain from sins. Why? It's because this is a bounty from Allah. It's a night that has been established to have more virtue. It's the height of ungratefulness that a person utilizes this gift from Allah in the disobedience of Allah. It shows a person is not valuing that which Allah Ta'ala is blessing a person with. Right? Avoid everything that goes contrary to Sharia. Some places, especially in the subcontinent, you'll see that they light up lights, they distribute some sweetmeats, they make sure they do this. Right? They have certain parties, specific dishes. So this becomes problematic in the sense where a person thinks and attaches it and thinks that it's part of the experience. A part of the experience, nothing is established besides a person exerting himself in trying to obtain the virtue of the night, as well as the virtue of the month of Sha'baan in general. For any questions related to today's presentation or the science of hadith in general, you can email this email that I have set up, and inshallah we can see that inshallah the purpose was that this 15th night of Sha'baan, there are those people that go on to one extreme and they establish those things that are not authentic. They do things that are completely baseless. Then you have got that extreme which completely rejects it. The people that have got no acquaintance with the science of hadith. People that don't know the intricacies and the details, the meticulousness of the ulama to the field of hadith. Right? So for such people to blatantly reject the virtue of the night, despite all that we have discussed tonight, it shows incompetence, right, with regards to it. This is why it's very important to understand who we take our deen from, to make sure that the people that we take our deen from are all those people that are reliable, right, that have got expertise. Just how a person doesn't go to any doctor. He makes sure if he's got an illness, he makes sure that he goes to a doctor that has got 5 stars, he's got the good ratings, right? Make sure that he's a proper guy, not a guy who's cutting bushes, you know. There's some doctors, I don't know, offend anyone, you know. But the point is, you make sure that you get the proper guy. Why? Because your health matters. More so is our deen. To make sure that we go to those people that are reliable and credible for matters of our deen. There are people nowadays, and this is also one fitna and one challenge that we are dealing with, is people understand that if you want to take people away from Islam and you wanna water down deen. If you tell people anything about Quran, they're going to say, Quran, how can you touch Quran? So what's the next thing they're going to go after? Hadith. What are they going to try to show? They're going to try and show and bluff people to show some expertise that they have. Show that how they can completely dismiss certain ahadith. Why? Because of whatever credentials they may have. But what we look at is our tradition it's so robust. The mechanisms that have been set in place, that what we know as established, we know thoroughly that it is established and why it is established. So this is inshallah, hopefully it was an enlightening experience where we understand, at the very least, we go and we leave tonight understanding this confidence that what we have of our deen is something that has reached us with a lot of sacrifices, right? With a lot of meticulousness, a lot of detail, with the backdrop of the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He'll preserve the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we understand that the 15th night of Sha'baan is going to be, for us, is going to be Thursday night, right? That is going to be, correct? Thursday night, right? The 15th night of Thursday night? So Thursday night is going to be the 15th night of Sha'baan. That is the night, Thursday night is always blessed, right? Because it's the night of Jumu'ah. But more so the 15th night of Sha'baan, how we have mentioned, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives, right, so many people on this night. We make sure that we try and exert ourselves. At the very least, we abstain from sins. it's our habit to scroll and to waste time on useless activities, to make sure that at least on this night, we be very careful. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to understand. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be from amongst those people that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has prophesied, that there will be that group of people that would purify my sunnah. After people had corrupted it, there'll be those people that would have undusted it, polished it, presented it in the way that it was meant to be presented. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be counted from amongst the people of Hadith, the people of the Sunnah, the people that work and strove to alive in the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanallah bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.